when it comes to something like The Sixth Sense, there's always kind of a debate about whether or not you want to classify it as a horror movie or just a thriller. But I mean, hey, there's ghosts and scary things, so I mean, either would be fine. With Unbreakable, unmistakably, it's more of a thriller, though there are supernatural elements, and of course, it's from M. Night Shyamalan, whose name is kind of synonymous with, you know, spooky and scary and supernatural and twisted kind of movies. So I think it's fair enough to give this a revisit during October time, which is what I've done after actually seeing Glass recently. It made me want to revisit this. So I'll definitely be talking about this today, and maybe the other films in this now trilogy from M. Night Shyamalan, his superhero trilogy, his own take on the genre, which is a very cool take and a very interesting, and it's definitely unique in its execution and the way it kind of interprets how comic books and superhero movies, or just superheroes in general, how they kind of fit into our culture and our folklore and things like that, and our understanding of the world and all that kind of stuff, which is pretty cool. And watching this again, it was definitely it was like a time capsule, really, like watching this movie again. This is from 2000, so this is right after the success of The Sixth Sense, which that's 20 years ago at this point, and it's hard to just describe to anyone who maybe hadn't seen it at the time or heard about it at the time, because it is a while ago now, but how huge of a hit that was, how much of a phenomenon that was, how much of an overnight success M. Night Shyamalan was, and how much of a kind of a wonderkind people saw him as after that film. Fresh out of film school, making one of the most successful movies of all time. And of course, it brought a huge resurgence to Bruce Willis's career in a certain respect. Like, I don't know, maybe before The Sixth Sense, though there have been other examples of his acting choices and abilities, but I don't know, maybe everyone kind of just saw him as this action hero kind of guy. But definitely with The Sixth Sense, it showed a more dramatic side that worked very well with that film, which continues on in this one. It's a very good dramatic performance from Bruce Willis, and not to mention kind of the state of how superheroes were seen in our culture at the time, in pop culture, where it's funny, like watching the movie, there's a title card explaining comic books to us, like, oh, so and so many comic books are published every year, this many people buys them. So comic books are prominent, they're important, which I guess literally has to be spelled out for the audience, who I guess at the time, I mean, didn't appreciate them in the way we appreciate them now and appreciate comic book movies now. Like, I mean, back in 2000, I don't know if this came before or after X-Men, but that movie kind of, brought superhero movies to a whole different level. And this one definitely contributed into giving them a certain kind of reverence, but interestingly enough, not adapting any kind of specific superhero, but going for its own lore completely, like its own story, its own kind of angle on it, and grounding it in a certain kind of reality where we can kind of interpret what may be considered superpowers as maybe something supernatural, or just maybe something, in in a human evolvement kind of thing, not like X-Men kind of deal, but just something like a medical kind of oddity, because basically the movie, it focuses on two different characters who are kind of the opposite of each other. We have the Bruce Willis character who in the opening scene, he's taking a train, and the train crashes, it derails, everyone dies, every last soul on the train is dead except for him, and not only that, he doesn't have a scratch on him. And opposite to him, we learn the story of Samuel Jackson's character, Mr. Glass, who's, well, Elijah is his real name, but Mr. Glass is his nickname, I guess, from the kids, or his alter ego. I guess there'll be spoilers in this review, so I'll warn of spoilers in the description. But we learn of him, who has this medical condition that his bones are very vulnerable, and like the slightest fall will break all his bones. I think he mentions he's had like over 50 to 60 breaks within his entire life, and he's kind of been searching for the opposite end of that. Where if he can have this medical oddity, then certainly someone could have something the opposite of that, couldn't they? And that's kind of basically what the movie's about. And Bruce Willis, his character, Devin Dunn is the character. He's realizing that he's different, and this train wreck, this works as a catalyst to this realization. And he's learning certain things about himself, like, have I ever really called in sick to work? Which I know is kind of like a cheesy plot line, but or plot element to the plot, where it's like, okay, maybe he just called in sick to have a day off and screw it. But no, never had a cold, sore throat, or anything like that. Just thinking, well, is there something different about me? But then other things add up. Like when he was a kid, he almost drowned in a pool, and he had an accident in high school. It ruined his football career. But then we learn certain things about that. Like we learn that he faked an injury because his wife didn't like such dangerous sports and stuff like that. So this is basically what we're learning as the audience, and coming to the same realization as him, that he has some kind of superpower, that he is indeed unbreakable. I even think, like, again, like putting on the nostalgia glasses, I think there was like the website at the time was areyouunbreakable.com, or maybe like that was just in the trailers, like, are you unbreakable, something like that, I don't know. But so basically it's a real life superhero movie interpretation kind of thing, which is kind of cool. And in creating its own lore and its own characters, it does have some interesting things. Like, not only is he uh, not able to be killed in this crash, and he has super strength. There's a scene with him and his son, and they're in the basement working with the weights, and they like keep on adding more and more, and it's like, wow, that's like 400 pounds or something like that, and he just does it almost effortlessly. Uh, but there's also his vulnerabilities, like like Superman has kryptonite. Devin Dunn finds out he has his own kind of vulnerable element, which in this case is water, which is why when things weren't adding up with the memory of almost drowning, it kind of starts to make sense. Okay, so he has a weakness despite all these powers, which is kind of funny because isn't that like what they did in Signs with M. Night Shyamalan next? But whatever. Also, that he has this ability to sort of psychically read people. Like, he thinks he just has good instinct because his profession in the film, he works as security in the stadium. So that's kind of an interesting part to the character. Not just because like Samuel Jackson like is hounding him about, like, why out of all the careers did you choose to protect people, but also because even though he essentially failed or gave up in his football career, he still kind of wants to be near it, that kind of deal. Um, but yeah, we learn that, like, just by brushing past someone or touching them, he's able to kind of pick up on things, like if someone's carrying a gun or something like that, or as the climax of the film shows us, if it's a crazed psychopath who's like holding a family hostage and torturing them and things like that. So that's all very interesting, and taken in very general ways from comic book characters and abilities, but absolutely Shyamalan makes them his own within the reality of this film. And just, from that angle, it's all great. It's all very compelling and different. But it is just in the same way that The Sixth Sense, in addition to its angle with this kid being able to see ghosts, but there's also a very legitimate dramatic element to it, where it is, in this case, it's about a family kind of struggling to stay together. Like, we learn in actually pretty, well done in subtle ways, that Bruce Willis and his wife, played by Robin Wright Penn, they're kind of on the rocks. They've been separated for a while. Like there's a scene in the beginning where he quickly takes off his wedding ring because he sees a lady on the train. He wants to kind of like flirt with her a little bit, pick her up, things like that. And like even like when they first find him at the hospital, we sense there's a distance, and like they don't even really have to explain that through dialogue, which Shyamalan loves doing. He loves droning on the dialogue and explaining things, but this is proof, at least of something early on in his career, where the subtler the better. So I thought that was great, and with Willis in this more reserved performance, I think it's all the more effective when there's a scene where he'll have to be a little bit more intense and he'll kind of act up a little bit more. Like he's very like quiet throughout the whole movie, but then there's one scene that has a really really good emotional impact where his son, he's just he's in full belief that his dad has these abilities and he wants to prove it. He so desperately wants to prove it, so he finds his dad's gun and he finds the ammunition. He points the gun right at him, and then he just loses it on the kid. Not like in a particularly bad way, but just like in a very emotionally wrenching kind of way, which was so effective. When in all most other scenes, he's just so quiet and reserved. So I thought that worked great. I thought it was a great performance from Bruce Willis, and definitely the more meteor performances from Samuel Jackson, who growing up his whole life, the kid, calling him Mr. Glass, wanting to stay inside, and his mother kind of getting him comic books, leaving them on the bench to pick up so that he'll be, inspired to go outside, go out into the world, and using that as, incentive to keep doing that. He becomes enamored with the world of comic books. Like a lot of children who maybe have to stay inside a little bit, stuck reading the comic books. They become such a big part of his life, and he treats them with such seriousness. And as true art, he opens up his own art gallery, limited edition, where he sells rare prints and concepts, and treats it respectfully. Like there's even like a scene in the beginning of the movie where he does kind of let loose on this guy who's like buying this print for his like 4-year-old kid, and he's like, what, how dare you, get out of here. So he's like, you'd love the internet in 2019, Mr. Glass, you'd love it. But yeah, I mean, like, this was a time when we didn't have comic book movies like left, right, and center, and they weren't treated as seriously as they are today, for better or worse. I mean, maybe we're spoiled today. Maybe we treat them with too much reverence. Like the slightest, problem someone may have with a certain aspect to a comic book movie can like feel like it means life or death to certain people. But whatever. I think maybe this movie was, at least in some ways, kind of a stepping stone to treating these movies more seriously, because it does it under the guise of a realistic thriller, where it's not it's absolutely not spandex and capes and flying around and destroying buildings and big fights with the supervillain. No, it's definitely immensely, profoundly less subtle than that, and the movie's all the better for that. And in fact, a lot of people, when they list their favorite superhero movies or comic book movies, even though this isn't based on a comic book specifically or anything like that, but it is based on comic books generally, if that counts, people will say this is one of their favorite superhero movies, and I can definitely see that. I can definitely see why, in a sea of big special effects laden kind of movies on this subject matter, where we get something like this, and something later on like Birdman. Like I think this and Birdman might make a good double bill, actually. Probably a better double bill than this and Split, or this and Glass, but that's a story for another day, I guess. But I think it's a great movie, actually. I thought the performances were great. Bruce Willis, Samuel Jackson, they're fantastic. One of Shyamalan's best, other than The Sixth Sense, I guess. Everything else, maybe not so much. But again, a story for another day. But it's 31 Days of Horror, so I'm doing horror movie reviews, thriller movie reviews, whatever you want to call it. Spooky October month. So stay tuned for more reviews. Maybe Split in Glass next, if I can stomach it. Thanks for watching.